Welcome to the Normal Operations module of the A320 RNP AR e-learning. Our objectives in this module are 1. To study specific operating procedures, SOPs, for RNP AR departures and arrivals. 2. To study system specifics for lateral and vertical navigation monitoring during RNP AR operations. 3. To study standard callouts for parameter deviations during RNP AR operations. And 4. To study pilot actions in case of lateral or vertical deviations during RNP AR operations. This module covers the standard operating procedures for RNP AR operations, including ground operations, takeoff and climb, descent preparation during cruise, descent and approach, and go around. In addition to a normal flight preparation, check the following items affecting RNP AR operations: the minimum equipment list, the RAIM prediction, the weather conditions, and the performance calculation. The minimum equipment configuration to initiate a RNP AR procedure is provided in the Special Operations section of the FCOM. The minimum equipment or functions required for RNP AR operations are also listed in the minimum equipment list. The minimum required equipment must be serviceable before conducting any RNP AR operations. This is also applicable in flight before starting the approach. Note: the authority might approve deviations from the above list. Refer to your operational documentation. As previously said in a prior module of this training, RAIM predictions are required for the intended time of RNP AR operations. The use of a ground-based prediction program is recommended to check GPS primary availability at the estimated time of operation in the following cases: for RNP AR operations strictly with less than 24 satellites available, within constrained environment mountainous areas where GPS satellites might be possibly masked by terrain and a GPS mask angle superior to 5 degrees, and when required by a national authority. In all other cases, GPS primary is available 100% of the time worldwide. Note: there are different ground-based prediction tools available which provide RAIM predictions. Takeoff performance calculations have to take into account the terrain and obstacles within the takeoff departure segment. In an RNP AR environment, there may be various standard instrument departures, SIDs, assigned to one runway, as well as possibly an engine out SID, an EO SID. The trajectory is studied on purpose to avoid obstacles. Crew must ensure that takeoff performance data are determined for the runway in use associated to the chosen SID and engine out SID, if any. Note: engine failed track, EFT, is generic terminology. It's the trajectory the flight crew must follow in case of an engine malfunction and the aircraft cannot clear the obstacles on the SID. In the A320 family, The functionality to insert this routing either automatically or manually is called EOCID. Therefore, in this course, we will systematically use the EOCID terminology. Check that weather conditions are appropriate for RNP AR operations. The airport outside air temperature, OAT, must be at or above the minimum temperature for the RNP AR approach as mentioned on the chart. The weather at alternate airport shall be in accordance with the planning minima as indicated in the operational documentation, and no adverse weather conditions within the RNP AR area, for example, thunderstorms, as deviations from RNP AR trajectories might not be possible, particularly below the MSA, or wind limitations, or once again, wind at altitude and its effect on RF legs. Amend the cockpit preparation to include RNP AR specific items like thunderstorms. Deviations from RNP AR trajectories are not possible below minimum sector altitude. Flight plan. RNP AR procedures must not be modified by the crew, for example, by the insertion or deletion of waypoints. Perf page. Check insert thrust reduction acceleration altitude and engine out acceleration altitude for takeoff and go around phases. A secondary flight plan, preferably engine out SID, to cover cases that are not detected by the aircraft and to allow flying the engine out SID on crew decision. Nav-aid deselection. As required. If NOTAMs warn of any unreliable or unserviceable DME or VOR/DME, access the selected nav-aids page and deselect the related nav-aid. Nav-aid tuning for displays should be performed as per company policy. Include specific items for RNP AR operations in takeoff briefing, such as takeoff minimum visibility for RNP AR operations, RNP takeoff data and applicable RNP value. In case an engine out SID is published, the location of the diversion point, DP. If the engine fails before the diversion point, the flight crew shall fly the engine out SID. If the engine fails at or after the diversion point, the flight crew shall fly the SID. During taxi, verify your PFD and ND settings. Check the presence of the LDEV scale. Select terrain on both ND unless one is required for weather radar display. Arc mode, 10 nautical miles range, select. This will allow a more accurate lateral path follow-up. For RNP AR departure, check. Both GPSs are in nav mode. Check nav is armed on the FMA. And GPS primary is available. On the runway, before thrust application, check that LDEV is centered. Note, for RNP AR departures less than 0.3, the autopilot must be engaged as soon as possible above 100 foot radio altimeter. Once the RNP AR departure is completed, remove the NavAid deselection and set the RAD nav page accordingly. For the RNP AR approach, check both GPSs are in nav mode on the GPS monitor page. The RNP value is in accordance with the intended minima, and GPS primary and high accuracy are available. Consider setting the ND to arc mode with a range of 10 nautical miles for accurate lateral path follow-up. Note, if the crew enters an RNP value manually in the MCDU, this value will be kept also in the missed approach, even if the value coded in the nav database is lower. This is because manual input on the MCDU prevails over coded values. For RNP AR approach, amend the approach preparation to include RNP AR specific items like aircraft equipment. Review the aircraft status versus minimum equipment for RNP AR. Weather and landing information. Verify that wind and temperatures are within limits. Flight plan page. The flight plan shall be loaded from the nav database without modifications. Go around strategy. Enter thrust reduction altitude and acceleration altitude for go around. Check the RNP AR capability and associated minima. In addition, as previously mentioned, set terrain or weather on ND as appropriate. Note, RNP procedures must not be modified by pilot insertion or deletion, for example waypoints or constraints. The vertical error budget does not include any margin for altimeter setting errors. If the crew mistakenly sets a barometric reference value of 1030, the terrain clearance is reduced. It is imperative that the crew sets and cross-checks the correct barometric reference setting. The altimeters need to be cross-checked before the final approach point. The difference of altimeter reading must remain within 100 feet. And note, use of the QNH from a remote station is prohibited. During an ILS approach, an incorrect altimeter setting will impact the intermediate approach altitude, but not the glide slope itself. During an RNP AR approach, in addition to the intermediate approach altitude, also the vertical path of the final approach is impacted as baro VNAV is used. To match certain altitude constraints, in this example, at or above 4,000 feet, a level off is predicted. In DES mode, this is materialized by ALT armed magenta and target ALT 4000 magenta on PFD, whereas clearance altitude is lower and is not displayed. When the descent path satisfies the altitude constraints at or above 4,000 feet, in this case, only the altitude selected on the FCU is displayed in blue. The lateral guidance mode, NAV, must be used during the entire RNP AR procedure, from the initial approach fix to the vertical intercept point or the final approach fix. When cleared for approach, manage the vertical profile to be at the VIP altitude before the VIP. Arm the approach when the aircraft is cleared for approach, and the final descent point is the 2 waypoint. Note: the use of VIP and FAF and FDP terminology depend on the context. The VIP and FAF are specific points on the instrument procedure, hence on the chart. The FDP is the point where the FMS will initiate the final descent. The VIP and the FDP are at the same physical position. Verify that all engagement conditions are met. Pay special attention to the descent arrow colour. If the colour is blue, all conditions are met. If the colour remains white, one or more conditions are not met. The position of the blue arrow on the ND indicates where the final descent will begin automatically. When final APP is displayed on the FMA, select the go-around altitude on the FCU. Disconnect AP for landing will be displayed on the PFD after crossing the decision altitude minus 50 feet. The disconnection of the autopilot is based on the crew decision. The autopilot must be disconnected before the autopilot minimum use height, MUH, which is 250 feet AGL for the A320. FD guidance down to the runway threshold can be used if relevant. Crossing the runway threshold, the FDs revert to heading VS mode. The use of the autopilot and flight director below minima should be consistent with airline policy. Caution: below the DA, visual clues must be used. A modification of the aircraft systems has been introduced with FMS Release 1A, which automatically arms the nav mode when toga is applied, for example in the case of a go-around. If nav does not engage automatically, engage it manually and then monitor LDEV. During go-around, do not revise any flight plan waypoint predicted below MSA. In case a flight plan revision is required for waypoints predicted above MSA, for example a new destination, then copy the active flight plan into the secondary before the revision is made, to be able to retrieve the original flight plan in case it's needed. Revise the secondary flight plan and check the revision, and then activate the secondary flight plan. Monitoring of lateral and vertical excursions must be performed from the initial approach fix. After the FAF, if VDEV reaches the operational limit of 75 feet, 3/4 of a dot below or above, then go-around should be initiated. From the IAF to the FAF, the obstacle clearance is guarded by MOCA and translated by altitude constraints in the various legs. Hence, only the managed descent mode, DES, must be used. If VDEV exceeds the callout limit 1/2 dot, 50 feet, above or below, a callout VDEV is performed by the pilot monitoring. Pilot flying has to check that the autopilot tends to reduce the vertical deviation VDEV. During the final approach segment only, if VDEV still increases and or reaches plus or minus 75 feet, 3/4 dot, a go-around must be initiated. Note, 1 dot corresponds to 100 feet. Let us look at an example of an RNP AR approach with RNP value of 0.1 nautical miles. If LDEV reaches 1/2 dot, a callout LAT-DEV must be performed by the pilot monitoring. Pilot flying has to check that the autopilot tends to reduce the lateral deviation LDEV. If the cross-track continues to increase to 1 times RNP, the pilot flying must initiate a go-around before reaching 1 times RNP. The following is a summary of flight parameter standard callouts during RNP AR approaches. LAT-DEV, VDEV, bank, sink rate. 3 protection zones can be identified: the normal zone, the analysis takeover zone, and the extraction zone. Normal zone. In the normal zone, the pilot monitoring shall call LAT-DEV when the LDEV deviation reaches 1/2 dot. In the normal zone, the pilot monitoring shall call VDEV when the VDEV indicator reaches 1/2 dot on the VDEV scale, plus or minus 50 feet. Analysis takeover zone. When the aircraft deviates outside the normal zone, but within the operational limits, 1 RNP lateral from the initial approach fix, or plus or minus 75 feet vertical deviation from the final approach fix, then the pilot flying shall take appropriate actions to reduce deviations. For example, reduce IAS and manual control to center the lateral deviation, etc. However, when deviations still tend to increase and or reach the operational limit, a go-around shall be performed. Extraction zone. Go around immediately and fly the most appropriate escape maneuver. When the aircraft deviates outside operational limits, 1 RNP from the initial approach fix or plus or minus 75 feet from the final approach fix, then the pilot flying must immediately perform a go-around and fly the most appropriate contingency procedure. We have now covered all of our objectives from the start of this module. To study specific operating procedures for RNP-AR departures and arrivals, to study system specifics for lateral and vertical navigation monitoring during RNP-AR operations, to study standard callouts for parameter deviations during RNP-AR operations, and to study pilot actions in case of lateral or vertical deviations during RNP-AR operations.